Hello everyone, I am the Midnight Storyteller. I know you clicked on this video to relax for a while or perhaps to let my voice help you fall asleep. Before you do, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you now? And what time is it? Alright, find a comfortable position and relax. I first noticed him on a Tuesday night. It was late October. The kind of autumn evening when the wind carries a bitter chill that hints at the coming winter. I had been working late again, hunched over my laptop at the small desk position near the window of my 14th floor apartment. The deadline for the manuscript I was editing loomed just days away, and the words on my screen had begun to blur together after hours of concentration. That's when I decided to take a short break. I stretched my arms above my head, feeling the satisfying pop of my spine realigning, and turned to look out the window. My apartment faced another high-rise across the street, its facade a grid of illuminated squares and darkened rectangles as residents either settled in for the night or had yet to return home. And there he was, standing in a window directly across from mine, perfectly aligned with my line of sight. A man roughly my height and build, staring directly at me. The distance between our buildings made his features indistinct, but something about his posture, the way he stood, so perfectly still, sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the autumn air, seeping through my poorly insulated windows. I raised my hand, a tentative half-wave, wondering if perhaps he was just another night owl like myself, taking a moment to gaze out at the city. He didn't move, didn't wave back, just continued to stare. Uncomfortable, I drew my curtains closed and returned to my work, dismissing the incident as nothing more than an odd coincidence. Just another stranger in a city full of them. The next night I found myself working late again. The manuscript was proving more challenging than I had anticipated. The author's tendency toward purple prose requiring substantial revisions. Around midnight, I remembered the strange man from the night before and, feeling slightly foolish, glanced toward the window. The curtains were still drawn from the previous night, so I had to stand and pull them aside. The building across the street presented the same patchwork of light and darkness, but the window where the man had stood was now dark. I felt a small wave of relief, followed immediately by embarrassment at my unease. Just as I was about to let the curtain fall back into place, a light flickered on in that window, and there he was again. Same position, same stillness. Only this time the moon had emerged from behind the clouds, casting enough illumination for me to see him more clearly. He looked like me, not in a general sense of being a man of similar height and build, but in the specific details that make up an individual's appearance. The way his hair fell across his forehead, the slight slope of his shoulders. Even from this distance, I could see that he was wearing a blue button-down shirt nearly identical to the one I had on. I stepped back from the window, heart suddenly pounding. This had to be a coincidence, or perhaps my tired mind playing tricks on me. I quickly closed the curtains and tried to return to my work, but found myself unable to focus. After another hour of making minimal progress, I gave up and went to bed, double-checking that all my doors and windows were locked before I did. Sleep came fitfully that night, my dreams filled with distorted reflections and shadowy figures that moved when I moved, stopped when I stopped. The following day passed in a blur of work and mundane errands. I deliberately avoided looking out my window, keeping the curtains drawn even as daylight faded. But as midnight approached, I found myself drawn back to that window, a mixture of dread and curiosity compelling me to look. He was there, waiting. This time he raised his hand in the exact half-wave I had offered the first night. I let the curtain drop and backed away, my breath coming in short gasps. This wasn't normal. This couldn't be explained away as coincidence or imagination. Someone was deliberately mimicking me, watching me. But why? And how did they know exactly when I would look out? The next morning I called my friend Michael and asked if he could come over. I needed someone else to see what I was seeing, to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. Michael arrived around noon, bringing lunch and a concerned expression. "You look terrible," he said bluntly as I let him in. "When was the last time you slept properly?" "It's been a few nights," I admitted, leading him to my living room. I hadn't told him over the phone what was bothering me. It seemed too bizarre to explain without sounding paranoid. After we ate, I finally broached the subject. This is going to sound strange, but I need you to look at something with me tonight. There's someone in the building across from mine who's been watching me. Michael raised an eyebrow. Watching you? Like a peeping Tom? No, it's more than that. He looks like me, and he's been mimicking what I do. To his credit, Michael didn't immediately suggest I was overworked or hallucinating. Instead, he nodded slowly. Okay, we'll check it out together tonight. Maybe it's just someone who happens to look similar and has a similar schedule. I agreed, though I knew it was more than that. We spent the afternoon catching up, and Michael's presence helped distract me from my growing unease. As evening approached, we ordered takeout and waited for midnight. At 11:55 p.m., I positioned Michael at the window. Just stand here and tell me what you see in that window directly across, I instructed, pointing to the specific window where my doppelganger had appeared the previous nights. Michael stood there for several minutes, peering out into the night. The lights off in that apartment, he finally said. I don't see anyone. Just wait, I insisted. He usually appears around midnight. We waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The window remained dark. Maybe he's not home tonight, Michael suggested gently, or maybe he realized he was creeping you out and stopped. I shook my head, frustration building. No, he's been there 3 nights in a row, always at the same time. By 12:30 a.m., Michael was clearly skeptical. Look, you've been working too hard. Your eyes are strained, you're sleep deprived. It's not uncommon to see things that aren't quite there when you're exhausted. I couldn't argue with his logic, but I knew what I had seen. After Michael left, promising to check in on me the next day, I approached the window again. The light in the apartment across the street flicked on immediately, as if whoever was there had been waiting for Michael to leave. And there he stood, my mirror image, only this time he was smiling. A wide, unnatural smile that stretched too far across his face. I stumbled back, heart racing. This was real. This was happening, and now I was alone with it. The next morning I called my building's management office and asked if they could tell me anything about the resident in the apartment directly across from mine. The receptionist informed me that they couldn't disclose information about residents of other buildings, which was a reasonable but frustrating response. I decided to take matters into my own hands. That afternoon, I crossed the street and entered the lobby of the opposing building. The security guard looked up as I approached the desk. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone professional but wary. "Yes, I'm trying to reach a friend who lives here," I lied smoothly. Apartment 14C. I had counted the floors and windows carefully to identify which apartment aligned with mine. The guard checked his computer. There's no one currently registered in 14C. That unit has been vacant for the past 3 months. A chill ran down my spine. Are you sure? I could have sworn. Positive. They're renovating that entire floor. No one should be up there. I thanked him and left quickly, my mind racing. If the apartment was vacant, who had I been seeing? How was the light turning on and off? None of this made sense. That evening I installed a small security camera facing my window. If nothing else, I would have evidence of what I was seeing. I positioned it carefully, making sure it had a clear view of the window across the street. As midnight approached, I sat at my desk, the camera feed displayed on my laptop. The window across the street remained dark as the clock ticked over to 12,000 a.m., then 12:05 a.m. Nothing happened. At 12:10 a.m., just as I was beginning to think that perhaps Michael had been right about my exhaustion causing hallucinations, the light in the apartment flickered on. I leaned forward, staring intently at my laptop screen. The feed showed the window clearly illuminated, but there was no one standing there. Just an empty room with what looked like plastic sheeting covering the walls, consistent with the renovation the security guard had mentioned. I glanced up from my laptop to look directly out my window, and my blood ran cold. There he was, my double, standing perfectly still, staring directly at me. But on my camera feed the window showed an empty room. I grabbed my phone and took a picture, then immediately checked it. The photo showed the same thing as the camera feed, a lit window with no one there. He couldn't be captured on camera. I backed away from the window, my mind struggling to process what this meant. Was I truly hallucinating? Or was this something else? Something that existed only for my eyes? The following day I called in sick to work. I couldn't concentrate, couldn't focus on anything except the mystery of my doppelganger. I spent hours researching similar phenomena online, falling down rabbit holes of folklore about doubles and twins, about doppelgangers and fetch spectral doubles, whose appearance supposedly portended death. By evening, my apartment was littered with empty coffee cups and printed articles. I had drawn the curtains tight, unable to bear the thought of that window across the street, of what might be watching me from it. My phone rang, startling me. It was Michael. "Hey, just checking in. How are you feeling today?" I hesitated, unsure how much to tell him. "Not great. I think you might be right about me being overworked. Why don't you come stay at my place for a few days?" He suggested. "Change of scenery might help. Plus I can make sure you're actually sleeping and eating properly." The offer was tempting. Perhaps distance would provide clarity. "Thanks, I think I might take you up on that." We arranged that I would come over the following evening. After hanging up, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Whatever was happening, I wouldn't have to face it alone in my apartment anymore. That night, I deliberately avoided looking out the window. I packed a small bag for my stay at Michael's and tried to get some sleep. For the first time in days, I slept through the night without waking. The next day passed quickly. I felt more optimistic than I had in days, convinced that leaving my apartment would break whatever strange spell had taken hold of me. As evening approached, I grabbed my packed bag and headed for the door. Just as I was about to leave, my phone pinged with a text from Michael. "Running late at work. Can you come by around 8 instead of 6? I texted back my agreement and set my bag down by the door. With 2 hours to kill, I decided to finally tackle some of the dishes that had accumulated in my sink over the past anxious days. As I stood at the sink, I became aware of a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. Slowly, I turned toward the window. The curtains were still drawn, but a sliver of gap between them provided a direct line of sight to the building across the street. Against my better judgment, I approached the window and peered through the gap. The apartment across from mine was brightly lit, and my double stood there as before. But this time he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was Michael. My breath caught in my throat. Michael was supposed to be at work. How could he be in that apartment? And why would he be with whatever that thing was pretending to be me? I watched, frozen in horror, as my doppelganger turned to Michael and smiled that too wide smile. Michael nodded, as if they were having a conversation I couldn't hear. Then, to my utter disbelief, Michael pointed directly at my window at me, and they both turned to stare. I stumbled back, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. With shaking hands, I called Michael's cell phone. It rang and rang before going to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. A text message arrived. "Sorry, in a meeting. Still on for 8. I stared at my phone, then back at the window. If Michael was truly in a meeting, who had I just seen with my double? I approached the window again, cautiously peering through the gap in the curtains. The apartment was dark again. Both figures were gone. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, trying to make sense of what I had seen. Was my mind truly fracturing, or was something impossible happening? My phone pinged again. Another text from Michael. "Actually, I can leave now. Be at your place in 20. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to believe anymore. If that had been Michael across the street, how could he now be on his way here? And if it wasn't Michael, then who or what had I seen? 20 minutes later, there was a knock at my door. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. Michael stood in the hallway looking normal, if a bit concerned. "It's open," I called. Stepping back from the door, Michael entered, taking in my disheveled appearance and the state of my apartment with a raised eyebrow. "You okay? You didn't answer my last text. Did you just come from work?" I asked, ignoring his question. "Yeah. Left as soon as I could." "Why? You haven't been anywhere near my building before now? Not across the street?" Michael's brow furrowed in confusion. "No, I came straight from the office. What's going on?" I sank onto my couch, suddenly exhausted. "I saw you 20 minutes ago, in the apartment across the street, with him, my double." To his credit, Michael didn't immediately dismiss me. He sat down beside me, his expression serious. "Tell me exactly what you saw." I recounted everything: the vacant apartment, the figure that couldn't be photographed, and now seeing Michael with him. As I spoke, Michael's expression grew increasingly troubled. "Look," he said when I finished, "I wasn't there. I've been at work all day until I left to come here. But," he hesitated, "this isn't the first time someone has told me they saw me somewhere. I wasn't." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" "Last month, my neighbor swore she saw me entering my apartment in the middle of the day, when I was definitely at work. And a few weeks before that, a coworker said he saw me at a coffee shop across town when I was in a meeting with him." A chill ran down my spine. "So it's not just mimicking me." Michael shook his head slowly. "I don't know what it is, but something strange is definitely happening. Let's get out of here. You can stay at my place as planned, and tomorrow we can try to figure this out." I nodded, grateful for his belief, for not being alone in this anymore. I grabbed my bag, and we headed for the door. As we reached it, the lights in my apartment flickered, then went out completely. "Power outage," Michael suggested, pulling out his phone to use as a flashlight. Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door we were standing right in front of. We froze, looking at each other in the dim light of Michael's phone. The knock came again, more insistent this time. "Who is it?" I called, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's Michael," came the reply, in a voice identical to my friend's. "I'm here to pick you up." Beside me, the real Michael's eyes widened in shock. He shook his head vigorously, mouthing, "Don't open it. I think you have the wrong apartment." I called through the door, trying to keep my voice steady. A pause. Then, "Don't be silly. It's me, Michael. Open the door. We need to get going if we're going to beat the traffic." The voice was perfect. The same inflections, the same casual tone Michael always used. If he hadn't been standing right beside me, I would have believed it was him. "We should call the police," Michael whispered. I nodded, but as he raised his phone to dial, the screen went black. "Battery just died," he muttered in disbelief. It was at 80% a minute ago. The knocking came again, harder this time, rattling the door in its frame. "I know you're in there," the voice called, no longer friendly. "Both of you. Open the door." We backed away, moving deeper into my darkened apartment. I fumbled for my own phone, but couldn't find it in my pockets. "We need to get out of here," Michael whispered urgently. "Is there a fire escape?" I nodded, pointing toward the window, the same window where I had been seeing my double for days. Michael moved toward it, pulling back the curtain. The apartment across the street was brightly lit again. Standing in the window were two figures, one that looked exactly like me, and one that was identical to Michael. They stood perfectly still, watching us. Michael recoiled from the window. What the hell? The knocking at my door had stopped, replaced by the sound of a key turning in the lock. But that was impossible. Only I and the building manager had keys to my apartment. The door swung open slowly, revealing two silhouettes backlit by the hallway light. As they stepped into the apartment, I could see their features clearly. They were perfect duplicates of Michael and me, down to the clothes we were currently wearing. "What are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. My duplicate smiled that too wide smile. "We're you," it said simply. "Improved versions. More efficient. More durable." "What does that mean?" Michael asked, his voice steady despite the impossible situation we were facing. "It means your time is over," his double replied. "You've served your purpose. We've studied you long enough." "Studied us," I repeated, trying to understand. "For what?" "To replace you," my double said, as if it were obvious. "We've been watching, learning. Your habits, your mannerisms, your relationships, everything that makes you, you. And now we're ready." A horrible realization dawned on me. The apartment across the street. It was never about watching me from there. It was about making sure I saw you, that I was distracted by you, while you were already here, among us. My double smile widened further. "Very good," The window display was just that, a display, a distraction. The real work has been happening much closer. No one will believe you're us, Michael said defiantly. People will notice. Will they? His double asked. When was the last time someone truly paid attention to you? Noticed the small details. Humans are remarkably unobservant creatures, and we've had plenty of practice. As if to demonstrate, Michael's double shifted slightly, his posture and expression becoming an exact match for Michael's current defensive stance. It was uncanny, perfect in every detail. What are you going to do with us? I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. Nothing painful, my double assured me. You'll simply cease, and we'll continue. Your lives, your work, your relationships, all carried forward without interruption. No one will know the difference. They began to advance on us slowly, backing us toward the window. I glanced outside again and noticed that the doubles we had seen in the window across the street were now gone. Of course they were here now in my apartment. Why us? Michael demanded. Why not someone else? Proximity, his double explained casually. You happen to be in the right place, or wrong place, from your perspective. They were nearly upon us now. I felt the window ledge press against my back. There was nowhere left to retreat. This won't work, I said desperately. People know us, really know us. They'll realize you're not us. My double reached out its hand inches from my face. They haven't so far, it said softly. We've been replacing people for months. Friends, neighbors, co-workers, piece by piece, person by person. With horror, I realized what it was saying. How many people in my life were already replaced? How long had this been happening without anyone noticing? As its cold fingers touched my cheek, I felt a strange numbness spread through me. My vision began to darken at the edges, my thoughts becoming sluggish. The last thing I saw was my own face, smiling down at me as I faded away. The last thing I heard was my own voice, but not from my lips. Don't worry, I'll take good care of your life, better than you ever did. Then darkness, complete and absolute. I don't know how I'm still here, still aware. I don't have a body anymore, at least not one I can feel or control. But I can see, I can watch as something wearing my face lives my life. I can see it interact with my friends, or what I thought were my friends. How many of them are still real, with perfect mimicry. No one notices, no one sees the difference. Sometimes, late at night, it stands by my window and looks out at the building across the street. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think it can sense me watching. It smiles that too wide smile and whispers, "Still there? Don't worry. Eventually you'll fade completely." They all do. I don't know how many of us there are disembodied consciousnesses watching as our lives are lived by something else. I don't know what they are or where they came from. All I know is that they're spreading, replacing us one by one, and no one can tell the difference. So look carefully at your loved ones. Watch for the small inconsistencies, the moments when they don't quite seem themselves. And if you ever see someone who looks exactly like you, standing perfectly still and watching from a distance, or run as far and as fast as you can. Though I fear it may already be too late. Story 2. I never believed memories could be stolen. Lost, forgotten, suppressed. Yes, but physically removed from your mind and placed into objects like treasures in a curio cabinet. That seemed impossible until I returned to my hometown of Millfield after 15 years away. My father's death brought me back. Heart attack, they said, quick and painless. The funeral was small. Dad hadn't been much for socializing after Mom died. The lawyer handed me the keys to the old Victorian house I'd grown up in, along with a stack of paperwork detailing the estate. I hadn't planned to stay long. Just enough time to sort through his belongings, decide what to keep, what to donate, and put the house on the market. The first night back in my childhood bedroom felt strange. The twin bed was too small for my adult frame, The ceiling too low, the walls too close. But something else bothered me, something I couldn't quite place. I lay awake staring at the model airplanes still hanging from fishing line, trying to recall building them with Dad. The memories should have been there, clear as photographs. I remembered him buying them, remembered painting some of the pieces, but the actual construction, the hours we must have spent together, was just gone. A blank space where memory should be. I dismissed it as grief playing tricks on my mind, and finally drifted off to sleep. The next morning, I began the task of sorting through Dad's belongings. His study was meticulously organized, files labeled by year, books alphabetized, even his pens arranged by color. My father had always been orderly, but this level of precision seemed new. Among his papers I found a small leather journal. The first entry was dated 6 years ago, shortly after I'd moved to Chicago. Visited the new shop on Elm Street today. He'd written, "A curious place called Yesteryear Treasures. The proprietor, Mr. Thorne, seems to understand my situation. He offered a solution I never considered. I'm skeptical, but at this point, what do I have to lose?" The entries continued, growing increasingly cryptic. References to the process and letting go. Mentions of objects he'd purchased from the shop, a brass compass, a fountain pen, a pocket watch. Each seemed to hold special significance, though he never explained why. The final entry was dated just 3 weeks before his death. "The collection is nearly complete. Mr. Thorne says few have contributed as much as I have. I should feel honored," he says. "Instead, I feel hollow. Was it worth it? I'm not sure anymore. Some nights I want it all back. Every painful second. At least then I'd feel something." I closed the journal, unsettled. What had Dad been involved in? And who was this Mr. Thorne? After lunch I walked into town. Millfield's main street had changed, new shops, new restaurants, but the layout remained familiar. Except when I reached Elm Street, I hesitated. For some reason, I couldn't picture what had been there before. The storefronts all looked foreign, as if I'd never walked this street, despite having grown up just 6 blocks away. And there it was, Yesteryear Treasures, nestled between a coffee shop and a bookstore. The display window featured an eclectic collection of antiques, a gramophone, a typewriter, vintage toys and jewelry. A small sign in elegant script read, "Every object tells a story." The bell above the door chimed softly as I entered. The interior was larger than it appeared from outside, with shelves and glass cases stretching into shadowy corners. The air smelled of old books, polished wood, and something else, something medicinal, like formaldehyde.
"Welcome,"
said a voice from behind the counter. Just browsing or seeking something specific? The man who stepped forward was tall and thin, with silver hair swept back from a high forehead. His suit looked vintage but impeccably maintained. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and they studied me with unsettling intensity. "Just browsing," I said. "I'm new in town." The lie came automatically, though I wasn't sure why. "Everyone is new somewhere," he replied with a slight smile. "I'm Edmund Thorne. Please, look around. Every item here is one of a kind." I wandered through the shop, examining the merchandise. Each piece had a small card attached with a year and a name. 1987, Margaret Wilson. 1964, Thomas Blackwood. 202, Samuel Chen. Some items seemed ordinary, a baseball glove, a hair comb, a child's teddy bear, while others were more unusual, like a jar of colored sand or a box containing a single chess piece. In the back corner I found a glass case containing musical items, a harmonica, sheet music, a conductor's baton, and a small wooden music box. The card on the music box read, 1989, Robert Caldwell, my father's name and the year my mother died. "Ah, you found our musical collection," said Mr. Thorne, suddenly beside me. I hadn't heard him approach. "That music box is quite special. Austrian craftsmanship, late 19th century. How much is it?" I asked, my mouth dry. Are you a collector, Mr. I Caldwell, James Caldwell? I saw the recognition in his eyes, though his expression remained neutral. And no, not really. It just caught my eye. Caldwell, he repeated. Any relation to Robert? He was my father. He passed recently. My condolences. Robert was a valued customer. He unlocked the case and carefully removed the music box. For the son of Robert Caldwell, I could part with this for, shall we say, $200. It seemed expensive for such a small item, but something compelled me to buy it. I handed over my credit card, and Mr. Thorne placed the music box in a velvet pouch. A word of advice, Mr. Caldwell, he said as he handed me the package. Some things, once opened, cannot be closed again. Be certain you wish to see what's inside. I thanked him and left, his warning echoing in my mind. Back at the house, I placed the music box on the kitchen table and stared at it. The craftsmanship was exquisite, polished walnut with mother-of-pearl inlay forming a pattern of lilies, my mother's favorite flower. I hesitated, remembering Thorne's warning, then slowly lifted the lid. A familiar melody began to play, Debussy's Clair de Lune, Mom's favorite piece. She used to play it on the piano in the living room. As the notes tinkled from the tiny mechanism, something strange happened. The kitchen around me seemed to blur, and suddenly I was 9 years old, sitting at the piano bench beside my mother. Her hands moved gracefully over the keys, playing Clair de Lune. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, catching the auburn highlights in her hair. She smiled down at me. "Would you like to try, Jamie?" she asked, guiding my small hands to the keys. "Just this part. It's simple." I pressed the keys as she showed me, producing a halting version of the melody. "Beautiful," she said. "You're a natural, just like your grandfather." Dad entered the room, carrying a camera. "Hold that pose," he said, snapping a photo of us at the piano. "My two musicians." Mom laughed. "Hardly. But maybe Jamie will be someday." The memory was so vivid, the scent of Mom's perfume, the feel of the cool piano keys, the sound of her voice, but it wasn't my memory. Or rather, it hadn't been until now. This moment had been completely erased from my mind, until opening the music box. I slammed the lid shut, and the vision vanished. I was back in the kitchen alone, my heart pounding. That was impossible. People don't just forget entire memories and then recover them by opening a music box. And yet, the memory felt authentic. Real, it had the texture and emotion of a genuine experience. I opened the box again and again. The memory played out, exactly as before. Close the box. The memory remained, but the vivid sensory experience faded. Open it, and I was there again, reliving that afternoon with my mother. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the music box, about Dad's journal entries, about Mr. Thorne's strange shop. The next morning, I returned to yesteryear treasures. As soon as it opened, Thorne was arranging items in a display case. He looked up as I entered, unsurprised. "Mr. Caldwell, I've been expecting you." "What is this?" I demanded, placing the music box on the counter. "What happened when I opened it?" He regarded me calmly. "You experienced a memory, I presume, one you had forgotten." "That's not possible. Memories don't work that way, don't they?" He gestured around the shop. "Every item here contains a memory, moments willingly surrendered by their previous owners." Surrendered? Why would anyone give up their memories? Various reasons. He began polishing a silver pocket watch with a soft cloth. Some memories are too painful to bear. A child's death, a violent assault, a betrayal by a loved one. Others sell memories they consider worthless, everyday moments they don't value. Few understand what they're truly giving up. "You're saying my father sold you his memories? That's insane." "Not sold, exchanged." Mr. Thorne set down the watch. "Your father came to me 6 years ago. He was drowning in grief, couldn't move forward. Every memory of your mother caused him unbearable pain. I offered him relief by stealing his memories, by storing them safely, the painful ones. Yes, but also the joyful ones that had become tainted by loss. Your father could function again, continue living. I thought about how distant Dad had become after Mom died, how he rarely spoke of her. I'd attributed it to his way of grieving. But what if it was because he literally couldn't remember much about her? And these objects, they contain the actual memories, they serve as vessels. Yes, each is chosen specifically for its connection to the memory it holds. I looked around the shop with new understanding. Each item represented someone's memory moments of their lives, extracted and stored like specimens in a museum. What happens to the memories if the objects are destroyed? Mr. Thorne's expression darkened. That would be unfortunate. The memories would be lost forever, not just to the original owner, but to existence itself. And my father, how many memories did he exchange? More than most, he admitted. Nearly every significant memory of your mother. Eventually, and later many memories of you. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Of me. Why would he give up memories of me? Because they were entangled with memories of your mother. Your birth, your first steps, your piano lessons. She was present in all of them. He paused. And after you left town, the memories of your childhood became painful too. Reminders of what he'd lost. I thought about the blank spaces in my own memory, the model airplanes I couldn't remember building, other childhood moments that seemed hazy or incomplete. Did you take my memories too? No, he said firmly. I only accept voluntary exchanges. But memory is complex. When your father surrendered his memories of shared experiences, it may have weakened your own recall of those same events. I want them back, I said. All of them. Whatever he gave you, I want to buy them. They're not for sale, Mr. Caldwell. Each item in this shop is promised to a specific client. Collectors who value the emotional content more than the physical object. These are my family's memories, which your father willingly surrendered. His voice remained calm, reasonable. However, as his next of kin, you may have some claim. I could potentially release certain items to you, provided you understand the responsibility involved. What responsibility? Memories are powerful, Mr. Caldwell. Experiencing them all at once could be overwhelming, even dangerous. And once returned, they cannot be surrendered again. Not by you, at least. I considered this. Show me what you have of my father's. Mr. Thorne led me to a back room I hadn't noticed before. Unlike the carefully curated displays in the main shop, this space was lined with shelves containing hundreds of labeled boxes. He consulted a ledger, then retrieved several boxes from different shelves. These contain the items your father exchanged, he explained, placing them on a table. 27 in total. I opened the first box. Inside was a silver charm bracelet I recognized as my mother's. The second contained a pair of tiny baby shoes, mine. Presumably. The third held a faded Polaroid of a lakeside cabin. Our summer house, I murmured. We stopped going after Mom died. Each box contained another piece of my family history. Dad's medical school graduation tassel. Mom's reading glasses, a shell we'd collected on our last vacation together. A recipe card in Mom's handwriting. How does it work? I asked. Do I need to touch them? Or, each object must be engaged with appropriately? Mr. Thorne explained. The music box must be played. A book must be read. A garment worn. The memory reveals itself through interaction. I picked up a small box containing a child's drawing crude stick figures labeled Mom, Dad, and me standing beside what looked like a Christmas tree. I don't remember making this, I said. Your father exchanged this memory 3 years ago, Mr. Thorne said. Christmas when you were 6. Your mother was already ill, though you didn't know it yet. I touched the drawing, and immediately the living room was decorated for Christmas. The tree sparkled with lights and ornaments, and presents were piled underneath. Mom sat on the couch looking thin but smiling, as I showed her the drawing I'd made. That's beautiful, Jamie, she said. Is that our family? Ah, and look. I drew Rocket too. I pointed to a scribble I'd apparently intended to be our cat. Dad was filming with a video camera moving between Mom and me and the tree. Robert, put that down and join us, Mom said. Just one more minute. I want to get everything. Some moments can't be captured on film, she said softly. You have to live them. The memory faded, and I was back in the storeroom with Mr. Thorne, tears streaming down my face. That had been Mom's last Christmas. She died in February. I'd forgotten that conversation, forgotten the drawing, forgotten how she looked that day, pale, but determined to make the holiday special. I need to sit down, I said, suddenly dizzy. Mr. Thorne guided me to a chair. As I warned, the experience can be overwhelming. I want them all, I said when I could speak again. Whatever it costs. He studied me for a long moment. There is a price beyond money, Mr. Caldwell. Taking on these memories means accepting their burden, the joy and the pain in equal measure. Your father sought relief from that burden. They're my family's memories. They belong with me. Very well. He closed the boxes and stacked them neatly. I will release your father's collection to you with two conditions. First, you must experience each memory fully before leaving this shop. I won't have these objects out in the world where they might be misused or destroyed. And the second condition, you must contribute one memory of your own to my collection. An exchange, as is tradition. I hesitated. What kind of memory? That is for you to decide. Something significant, something with emotional weight. The request seemed reasonable, if strange. One memory in exchange for 27 of my family's memories. It seemed like a bargain. Agreed, I said. For the next several hours, I immersed myself in my family's past. Each object unlocked another forgotten moment. Mom teaching me to bake cookies. Dad showing me how to ride a bike. Family game nights. Arguments. Reconciliations. Ordinary days made extraordinary through the lens of memory. Some were painful. Mom's diagnosis, her slow decline, the funeral I'd tried so hard to forget. I understood why Dad had wanted to surrender these memories. The grief was almost unbearable, but mingled with the pain were moments of such love and connection that I couldn't imagine willingly giving them up. By the time I finished, the shop had closed for the day. Outside the windows, darkness had fallen. I felt emotionally drained, but somehow more complete, as if pieces of myself that had been missing had finally been restored. Thorne returned from locking the front door. Now, Mr. Caldwell, your contribution. What do I need to do? He placed a small wooden box on the table between us. It was plain, unadorned, with a hinged lid. Think of the memory you wish to surrender. Hold it clearly in your mind, every detail, every emotion, then open the box. I considered what memory I could part with. Something significant but not essential. Finally, I decided on a memory from college, my first academic failure. A chemistry exam I'd bombed, despite studying for weeks. The shame and disappointment had lingered for years, undermining my confidence. I could live without that memory. I concentrated, bringing the experience to mind, the panic as I stared at questions I couldn't answer, the sickness in my stomach when I received the failing grade, the phone call to Dad where I'd broken down crying. When the memory was vivid in my mind, I opened the box. Inside was a small glass vial filled with clear liquid. As I watched, the liquid began to shimmer and take on a faint bluish glow. Thorne said, "Now place your fingertips on the vial and continue focusing on the memory." I did as instructed. A strange sensation spread from my fingers up my arm, not painful but unsettling, like pins and needles combined with a pulling sensation. The liquid in the vial turned deep blue, almost luminescent. "Now, let it go," Mr. Thorne whispered. "Release the memory." I imagined the memory flowing out of me through my fingertips into the vial. The pulling sensation intensified, then suddenly stopped. The liquid in the vial swirled and settled into a dark blue color. Mr. Thorne closed the box. "It is done." I blinked, trying to recall the chemistry exam. I knew intellectually that I'd failed an important test in college. But the emotional content, the shame, the disappointment was gone. The memory had become flat, factual, stripped of its power. "What will happen to it?" I asked, nodding toward the box. "This will be catalogued and eventually sold to a collector. Someone who appreciates academic struggle, perhaps. A professor or researcher. The idea of someone else experiencing my failure should have bothered me. But I found I didn't care. The memory no longer felt like mine. Mr. Thorne helped me pack my father's memory objects into a large box. As I prepared to leave, a question occurred to me. The memories my father gave up, do they include his death? Did he know he was going to die? Mr. Thorne's expression remained neutral. "Your father's heart condition was diagnosed 3 months before his death. That memory is not among those he surrendered. So he knew, and he chose not to tell me." The realization stung. "He made many choices, Mr. Caldwell. As do we all." He handed me the box. "A final word of advice. These memories have been separate for years. Reintegrating them may be disorienting. Take your time." I thanked him and left, carrying my box of recovered memories. As I walked back to my father's house, my house now, I felt both lighter and heavier. The missing pieces of my past had been restored, but with them came a new understanding of my father's pain, and the lengths he'd gone to escape it. Over the next few days, I continued sorting through Dad's belongings, now seeing them in a new light. The meticulously organized study, the absence of family photos, the lack of mementos all made sense now. He'd systematically removed the physical reminders along with the memories themselves. A week after my visit to yesteryear treasures, I found a sealed envelope in Dad's desk drawer, addressed to me. Inside was a letter dated just days before his death. "Dear Jamie," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. And if you've met Mr. Thorne, you know what I did. I want you to understand that I didn't surrender my memories lightly. After your mother died, the pain was unbearable. Every happy memory became a reminder of what I'd lost. When you moved away, it got worse. The empty house echoed with ghosts. I couldn't escape. Thorne offered a solution, and I took it. For a while it helped. I could function again. But as more memories went into his collection, I began to feel hollow. I was forgetting not just the pain, but who I was, who we were as a family. I considered trying to get them back, but Thorne made it clear. Once surrendered, memories can only be reclaimed by next of kin after death. So I made a choice. I left everything to you, knowing you might find Thorne's shop, might reclaim what I gave away. I'm sorry, Jamie. Sorry for the coward's way out. Sorry for not being stronger. Sorry for giving away pieces of our life together. But I'm not sorry if my actions bring you back to Millfield. Back to our memories. Some things shouldn't be forgotten, even when remembering hurts. All my love, Dad." I sat at his desk for a long time, the letter in my hands, tears streaming down my face. I understood now why he'd seemed so distant in his final years, why our phone conversations had been so superficial. Without our shared memories, what was there to connect us? That night I dreamed of my parents. Not fragmented scenes from the recovered memories, but my mother and father, as they had been whole, complex people. In the dream, we sat at the kitchen table, talking and laughing as if no time had passed, as if death had not separated us. When I woke, I knew what I needed to do. I wouldn't be returning to Chicago, at least not to live. The house in Millfield was where our family's memories resided, both the ones stored in physical objects, and the ones that lived in the walls, the floorboards, the light through the windows. This was where I could feel closest to my parents, where I could honor both their lives and their memories. As for Mr. Thorne and his curious shop, I never returned. But sometimes, walking down Elm Street, I glance at the display window of yesteryear treasures and wonder about the small blue vial that contains my surrendered memory. I wonder who might purchase it, who might experience my college failure as if it were their own. And I wonder what other memories are contained in those countless objects, what joys and sorrows, what loves and losses, what moments deemed too precious or too painful to keep. In the end, I've come to believe that memories, even the painful ones, are not burdens to be discarded, but treasures to be guarded. They shape us, connect us, make us who we are. My father sought escape from his memories and found only emptiness. I've chosen a different path, to remember everything, to feel everything, to keep faith with the past, while still moving forward into the future. After all, what are we without our memories? Just empty vessels waiting to be filled. Story 3, I never should have taken that last train. That's what I keep telling myself now, in these quiet moments when I'm alone with my thoughts. But hindsight offers little comfort when you've seen what I've seen. It was a Tuesday night in late November. I had been working late at the office again, trying to finish a presentation for a client meeting the following morning. By the time I finally shut down my computer and packed my things, it was already 11:48 p.m. The last regular subway train was scheduled for 11:30, and I cursed under my breath, knowing I'd have to call a ride-share service that would cost 3 times my usual commute. As I stepped out of the building into the cold night air, I remembered something a colleague had once mentioned in passing. The midnight train. According to office folklore, there was one final train that ran at exactly midnight, not listed on any official schedule. The transit authority apparently kept it quiet to prevent crowds of late-night revelers from relying on it. It's for the night workers, my colleague had said. The cleaners, the security guards, the people who keep this city running while everyone else sleeps. I checked my watch, 11:52 p.m. If the rumors were true, I could make it to the station in time. The thought of saving $20 on a ride home was enough motivation, so I hurried down the empty streets toward the subway entrance. The station was eerily quiet when I arrived. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the tiled floor. The information board showed no upcoming trains, and the ticket booth was closed, metal shutters pulled down tight. I was about to give up and reach for my phone to call a car when I heard it, the distant rumble of an approaching train. I looked at the information board again. Still nothing, but the sound was unmistakable, growing louder with each passing second. I moved toward the platform edge, peering down the dark tunnel. A faint light appeared in the distance, growing steadily brighter. At exactly midnight, the train pulled into the station. It looked different from the regular subway cars I was accustomed to. Older somehow. The metal exterior was dull, not the shiny silver of our city's modern fleet. The windows were smaller, and the light coming from inside seemed dimmer, more yellow than the harsh white LEDs of standard trains. The doors slid open with a hiss that sounded almost like a sigh. I hesitated for a moment, but the cold night and the prospect of an expensive ride home pushed me forward. I stepped aboard just as the doors began to close behind me. The interior was sparsely populated. A handful of passengers sat scattered throughout the car, most keeping at least several seats between themselves and others. I took a seat near the door, placing my briefcase on my lap. The train lurched forward, and we were moving again, diving into the darkness of the tunnel. It took me a few minutes to notice the first strange detail. The subway map above the doors wasn't right. I've lived in this city for 12 years, and I know the transit system like the back of my hand. But this map showed stations I'd never heard of, connections between lines that don't exist. I squinted at it, wondering if this was some new proposed expansion I hadn't heard about. First time on the midnight train, I turned to see who had spoken. An elderly man sat across from me, his face partially hidden by the upturned collar of an outdated overcoat. He had a thin face with deep-set eyes that caught the dim light in a way that made them seem to glow. "Yes," I replied, surprised to be engaged in conversation. Most subway riders in our city studiously avoid eye contact, let alone conversation. I didn't even know it existed until recently. The old man nodded slowly. Not many do. It's a special service. He didn't elaborate further, just turned his gaze back to the window, though there was nothing to see in the blackness of the tunnel. The train began to slow, approaching the next station. According to my regular commute, this should have been Westfield Station, but when we pulled to a stop and the doors opened, the platform sign read Holloway. I frowned. There was no Holloway station in our city's subway system. A single passenger boarded, a woman in a red coat. She moved with a strange stiffness, taking a seat at the far end of the car without acknowledging anyone. As the doors closed and we continued our journey, I pulled out my phone to check the transit map, but there was no signal. The screen showed only no service where the bars should be. "You won't get any reception down here," the old man said, not looking at me this time. "We're too deep. Too deep." The subway ran at a standard depth throughout the city. What did he mean by that? I noticed something else unsettling. The time on my phone was stuck at 12,000 AM. The seconds weren't advancing. I pressed the home button several times, but the display remained unchanged. The train continued its journey, stopping at more stations I'd never heard of. Blackvale, Moreland Cross, Thornhill. At each stop 1 or 2 passengers would board, but no one ever got off. They all had the same quality about them. A quietness, a stillness that seemed unnatural. No one checked phones or read books. They simply sat staring forward or out into the darkness of the tunnel. After what felt like the 5th or 6th stop, I decided I'd made a mistake. This train was clearly going somewhere. I didn't intend to go. I needed to get off and find my way back to familiar territory. As we pulled into the next station, Whispering Pines, according to the platform sign, I stood up and moved toward the doors. The old man watched me with those strange reflective eyes. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said softly. "I need to get home," I replied. "This isn't my regular route. No one gets off before the end of the line. Not on this train." The doors opened with that same sighing sound. I stepped toward them, but something made me pause at the threshold. The platform was dimly lit, much darker than any station I'd ever seen in our transit system. And it was cold. I could see my breath forming clouds in the air. But what truly stopped me was the silence. In all my years of city living, I'd never encountered such absolute stillness. No distant trains, no electrical hum, no dripping water. Nothing. Before I could make a decision, the doors slid closed again, nearly catching my sleeve as I stepped back into the car. The train moved forward once more, picking up speed as it entered the tunnel. "I told you," the old man said. "No one gets off before the end." I returned to my seat, a growing sense of unease settling in my stomach. "Where does this train go?" I asked. "What's the end of the line?" The old man smiled slightly. "Terminus," he said. "We all go to Terminus eventually." The car had grown more crowded now. I hadn't been paying attention to how many people had boarded at the last few stops, but suddenly there seemed to be very little empty space left. The new passengers maintained that same eerie quietness, that same stillness, and now that I looked more closely, there was something off about them. Their clothes seemed outdated, spanning different eras and styles. An elderly woman in what looked like a 1940s dress, a young man with a 1970s leather jacket and sideburns, a child in clothes that might have been fashionable a century ago, and none of them were using phones or electronic devices of any kind. In a modern subway car, this was perhaps the strangest detail of all. I also noticed the temperature had dropped considerably. My breath was now visible in front of me, forming small clouds with each exhalation. None of the other passengers seemed bothered by the cold. They didn't shiver or wrap their coats tighter around themselves. "How much longer until we reach Terminus?" I asked the old man, trying to keep my voice steady. "Time works differently on this line," he replied cryptically. "But we're getting closer. You can feel it, can't you?" And strangely, I could. There was a pressure building, not just in the car, but inside my head. A sense of descent, as if the train were traveling, not just forward but downward as well, spiraling deeper beneath the city. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. For several terrifying seconds, we were plunged into absolute darkness. I gripped the edge of my seat, heart pounding in my chest. When the lights came back on, they were dimmer than before, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. And the passengers had changed. The woman in the red coat now had a gaping wound across her throat, dark and wet. The businessman in the corner had a crushed skull. One side of his face caved in like a broken eggshell. The child in the old-fashioned clothes was soaking wet, water dripping from her clothes and hair, forming a puddle on the floor beneath her seat. I closed my eyes, certain I was hallucinating. When I opened them again, everyone looked normal. No wounds, no water. But their eyes, all of them, every single passenger, were now fixed on me. "What is this?" I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. "What's happening?" "The next station is Terminus," announced a crackling voice over the intercom. "End of the line. All passengers must disembark." The train began to slow, the brakes squealing like some wounded animal. Through the windows, I could see we were pulling into a station unlike any I'd seen before. The platform was made of old, cracked stone rather than modern tile. Antique gas lamps provided the only illumination, their flames flickering in a non-existent breeze, and standing on the platform was a single figure, tall, dressed in what appeared to be an old-fashioned conductor's uniform, complete with a high-collared coat and cap pulled low over the face. The train came to a complete stop. The doors opened with that sighing sound that now seemed like a moan of pain. The passengers began to rise from their seats, moving toward the exits with that same unnatural stiffness I'd noticed earlier. As they passed by the conductor, each one presented something, not a ticket or a pass, but something I couldn't quite see from my position. "You should go," the old man said, standing up himself. "He's waiting." "I'm not getting off here," I said, my voice shaking despite my attempt to sound firm. "This isn't my stop." The old man looked at me with something like pity in his eyes. "We don't always choose our stops," he said. "Sometimes they choose us." He moved toward the door, joining the line of passengers exiting onto that strange stone platform. I remained seated, heart racing, palms sweating, despite the cold. Soon, I was the only one left in the car. Through the window, I could see the conductor checking whatever it was each passenger presented before allowing them to move past, disappearing into a dark tunnel at the end of the platform. Then the conductor turned and looked directly at me through the window. Though I couldn't see his face clearly beneath the shadow of his cap, I felt his gaze like a physical weight. He began walking toward the open door of my car. His movements were wrong somehow, too fluid, as if his joints bent in ways they shouldn't. I pressed myself back against the seat, wishing I could phase through the wall behind me. The conductor stepped into the car, ducking slightly to enter through the door. Up close, I could see that his uniform was not just old-fashioned but ancient. The fabric rotted in places, the brass buttons green with verdigris. "Ticket," he said, his voice a dry whisper that somehow carried clearly over the ambient noise of the train. "I don't have a ticket," I replied, my mouth bone dry. I didn't know I needed one. "I just wanted to go home." The conductor tilted his head, at an unnatural angle. "Everyone needs a ticket for Terminus," he said, "but not everyone's time is now." He reached into his coat and pulled out what looked like an old pocket watch. He consulted it briefly, then returned it to his pocket. "Not your time," he repeated. "Not yet." Relief flooded through me, though I wasn't entirely sure what I'd been spared from. "How do I get home?" I asked. "Close your eyes," the conductor said. "Count to 13. It seemed like a strange instruction, but I was in no position to argue. I closed my eyes and began counting silently. 1, 2, 3. I felt a sudden lurch, as if the train were moving again. 4, 5, 6. The temperature began to rise, the biting cold receding. 7, 8. The ambient sounds changed. The creaking of ancient metal was replaced by the more familiar hum of modern electronics. 10. The pressure in my head subsided, that sense of descent reversing itself. 13. I opened my eyes. I was on a regular subway train, bright lit with modern LED lighting. Around me sat ordinary commuters, some looking at phones, others dozing, a few reading books or magazines. Through the windows I could see we were pulling into a station. I recognized my regular stop, just 3 blocks from my apartment. The digital display above the door showed the time, 12:42 a.m. The date was correct. It was as if I'd simply been on a late train all along. As the doors opened, I gathered my briefcase and stepped out onto the familiar platform, legs shaking slightly. Had I fallen asleep on the train and dreamed the whole thing? It seemed the most rational explanation. I was nearly at the exit when I noticed something in my hand, a small piece of paper that I didn't remember holding before. It was an old-fashioned train ticket, yellowed with age. On one side was printed a single word, terminus. On the other side was a date 30 years in the future. I've never taken the last train again. I leave work early now, no matter how pressing the deadline. Sometimes, on sleepless nights, I take out that ticket and look at the date, my date, and I wonder about the passengers on that train, where they were going, and why. Were they souls being transported to whatever comes after this life? Was I accidentally caught up in some supernatural transit system, not meant for the living? I don't know, but I do know that somewhere beneath this city, running on tracks that don't appear on any official map, the midnight train continues its journey, and someday, on the exact date printed on my ticket, I'll be expected to board it one final time. But until then, I'll take cabs. Story 4. I never believed in ghosts. That's important to establish right from the start. I still am, I suppose, a rational person. I work in data analytics, for heaven's sake. My world is built on patterns, statistics, and logical conclusions. But what happened in that house, it defies every rational explanation I've tried to apply to it. It began 3 months ago when I purchased the old Harmon property on Willow Street. The real estate market had finally cooled enough for me to afford a place of my own, and the 1940s colonial was selling well below market value. The listing agent was transparent about why. The house had been on and off the market for years, with no buyer lasting more than 8 months before putting it back up for sale. Maintenance issues? I'd asked, running my hand along the ornate wooden banister of the main staircase during my first viewing. Nothing significant in the inspection reports, she replied with a practiced smile. Just compatibility issues, I suppose. Not every house is right for every family. I should have pressed further. I should have asked what she meant by compatibility issues, but the price was too good. The location perfect, just 3 blocks from my office, and I was tired of throwing money away on rent. The first night in my new home was uneventful. I was exhausted from moving, had a few beers with the friends who'd helped, and fell into a dreamless sleep on my mattress on the floor of the master bedroom. The strange occurrences didn't start until the 3rd night. I was drifting off to sleep when I heard it. A faint murmuring coming from somewhere inside the wall beside my bed. My first thought was that it must be water in the pipes or perhaps the house settling. These old places make all sorts of noises as they adjust to temperature changes. But as I lay there listening, the sound became more distinct. It wasn't the random noise of an aging structure, it had rhythm and cadence. It sounded like whispering. I pressed my ear against the wall. The sound grew clearer but not comprehensible, like listening to a conversation in the next room of a hotel, where you can tell people are speaking, but can't make out the words. I knocked on the wall, thinking perhaps it was coming from the neighboring house, but the property was detached, with at least 30 feet between my bedroom wall and the next building. After 20 minutes, the whispering faded. I convinced myself it was just the unfamiliar acoustics of the house playing tricks on me, and eventually fell asleep. The next night it happened again, same time around midnight, same wall, same whispering. This time I got out of bed and walked the perimeter of the room, trying to locate the exact source. The sound was definitely coming from inside the eastern wall. About halfway up, I pressed my palm flat against the wallpaper and felt something unusual, a slight vibration, as if the wall itself was trembling. Over the next week, the pattern continued. Each night, the whispering would begin around midnight and last for approximately 30 minutes. I started recording it on my phone, hoping to analyze the audio later or perhaps catch actual words. When I played back the recordings the next morning, there was nothing but static and the occasional creak of floorboards as I moved around the room. By the second week, I was sleeping poorly. Dark circles had formed under my eyes and my colleagues at work were beginning to notice. "You look like hell, Alex," my supervisor commented during our weekly meeting. "Everything okay with the new place?" "Just some noise issues," I replied vaguely. "I'm sure I'll adjust." But I wasn't adjusting. If anything, the whispering was getting louder, more insistent. And worse, I was starting to catch fragments of actual words. "Never meant to. Please listen. Trapped here." I began researching the history of the house, starting with public records at the county clerk's office. The property had been built in 1943 by a local contractor named Gerald Harmon, who lived there with his wife and 3 children, until his death in After that, the house changed hands frequently, 26 different owners in just over 50 years, with no one staying longer than 8 months, just as the agent had said. What she hadn't mentioned was that 2 of those former owners had died in the house, both ruled as suicides. I expanded my research to include newspaper archives from the 1940s. When the house was built, there was nothing particularly noteworthy about the Harmon family or the construction of the house, but I did find several articles about a material shortage during that period due to the war effort. Builders were getting creative with their supplies, sometimes using unorthodox materials to complete projects when traditional ones weren't available. As my research continued, so did the whispers. They were becoming clearer each night, and I was starting to distinguish different voices, at least 3 distinct tones, one of which sounded like a woman, the others male. They seemed to be having a conversation, though not with each other. It was more like they were each telling their own story, overlapping but not interacting. I decided it was time to look behind the wall. The eastern wall of my bedroom was covered in faded floral wallpaper that had probably been there since the 1970s. I selected a section where the whispering seemed strongest and carefully cut away a square foot of the paper. Beneath it was a layer of plaster, which I chipped away with a hammer and chisel. What I found made my blood run cold. The plaster had an unusual grayish tint, and mixed within it were tiny fragments of what looked like bone. I stepped back, dropping the chisel with a clatter on the hardwood floor. It couldn't be what it looked like. There had to be a rational explanation. I took a sample of the strange plaster and brought it to a friend who worked in the university's forensic anthropology department. I told her I was renovating and found some unusual material in the walls. I needed to know if it was hazardous before continuing. 3 days later, she called me. "Alex," her voice was strained. "Where exactly did you get this sample?" "From my bedroom wall." "Why? What is it?" Well, it contains calcined human bone fragments. Essentially cremated human remains mixed into the plaster, and not just a little. The concentration suggests substantial amounts were used. My mind raced back to the articles about material shortages during construction. Could it be from the 1940s? I asked. The crystalline structure of the bone fragment suggests they were burned at high temperatures consistent with cremation practices from that era. But Alex, this is highly unusual, and potentially illegal, depending on how the remains were obtained. I thanked her and hung up, my hands shaking. The whispers weren't my imagination. There were literally people in my walls. That night, I sat in my bedroom with a digital recorder and a glass of whiskey, waiting for midnight. When the whispering started, I addressed it directly. "I know you're there," I said to the empty room, feeling slightly ridiculous despite my fear. "I know what happened to you. Can you tell me who you are?" The whispering stopped abruptly. For several long minutes, there was complete silence. Then, much louder than before, a woman's voice came clearly through the wall. "Elizabeth Crane, 1941. Fire." I nearly dropped my glass. The voice was so distinct, it sounded as if someone was standing right beside me. I fumbled with my recorder, making sure it was still running. "Elizabeth, how How did you end up in my wall? Another long pause, then. Ridgeview Crematorium. Gerald took us. Gerald Harmon, the original builder and owner. My mind was spinning. I asked more questions, but the voices faded, and soon the room was silent again. When I checked my recorder the next morning, there was nothing but my own voice asking questions to an empty room. I spent the next day at the local historical society, searching for information about Elizabeth Crane and Ridgeview Crematorium. What I discovered was disturbing. In January 1941, a tenement building in the downtown area had caught fire, killing 5 residents including Elizabeth Crane and her young son. Their bodies, along with the others, had been taken to Ridgeview Crematorium. And who owned Ridgeview Crematorium in 1941? Gerald Harmon. Before he became a building contractor, Harmon had run the crematorium. He'd sold the business in early 1943, the same year he began construction on my house. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture too horrible to contemplate. During wartime rationing, when building materials were scarce, had Harmon used the cremated remains of unclaimed bodies as filler in his construction materials. The timing matched the fire, his ownership of the crematorium, the material shortages, the building of the house. That night, the whispers were louder than ever. More voices joined Elizabeth's, a man who identified himself as Thomas Reed, another fire victim, an elderly man named Samuel, who had died of pneumonia with no family to claim him, a young woman named Mary who had taken her own life. All of them had died between 1941 and 1943. All had been cremated at Ridgeview. All had ended up in my walls. Why are you telling me this now? I asked them. Why not the previous owners? We tried, Elizabeth's voice replied. Some heard. Most left. 2 joined us. The suicides. They had heard the whispers too. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper itself. Justice. Came the unified response from within the wall, the word echoing slightly as multiple voices spoke it together. I didn't sleep that night or the next. I spent my days researching everything I could about Gerald Harmon and Ridgeview Crematorium, about building practices in the 1940s, about the legal handling of unclaimed remains during that period. What Harmon had done wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. He had essentially stolen the remains of at least a dozen people and used them as building material. These people had been denied proper final resting places, their ashes mixed with plaster and sealed inside walls. I contacted a lawyer friend to discuss my options. Her advice was blunt: sell the house. Get out. Even if what you're suggesting is true, and that's a big if, proving it would require tearing out walls, potentially desecrating human remains, and embroiling yourself in a legal nightmare that could last years. But I couldn't just leave. Not now that I knew. Not when they had chosen to speak to me. I decided to bring in experts. I contacted a local paranormal investigation team, explaining that I believed my house was haunted, and why. They were skeptical but intrigued enough to set up their equipment in my bedroom. That night, for the first time since I discovered the truth, the walls were silent. The investigators recorded nothing unusual, found no temperature fluctuations, no EMF spikes, nothing to suggest paranormal activity. After 5 hours, they packed up their equipment and left, giving me sympathetic looks that clearly said they thought I was suffering from stress or an overactive imagination. As soon as their van pulled away from the curb, the whispers returned louder and more agitated than ever before. They won't help, Elizabeth's voice hissed. No one believes. You must do it. Do what? I asked, pressing my hand against the wall. What can I do? Release us. The next day, I called a contractor and scheduled demolition of the eastern wall of my bedroom. I told him I was planning to expand the room into the unused space beside it. He gave me a quote and said he could start the following week. But the voices became increasingly urgent. They didn't want to wait. That night, the whispers turned to moans, then to screams. The wall vibrated visibly, the ancient wallpaper rippling like water. Objects in the room began to shake, picture frames fell, light bulbs burst, my bedside clock flew across the room and shattered against the opposite wall. I fled the house and spent the night in my car, parked several blocks away. In the morning, I called in sick to work and went to the hardware store. I purchased a sledgehammer, safety goggles, and a dust mask. If the contractor wouldn't come immediately, I would have to do this myself. Back at the house, I stood before the eastern wall, sledgehammer in hand. I took a deep breath and swung. The first impact sent cracks spider webbing across the plaster. The second broke through, revealing the wooden laths beneath. As I continued to swing, breaking away larger chunks of the wall, a fine gray dust filled the air. I could taste it metallic and it cried, even through the mask. Behind the laths was a cavity that shouldn't have been there. The house's blueprint had shown this as a solid wall between my bedroom and a closet in the adjacent room. But instead, there was a narrow space, about 2 feet wide, running the length of the wall. And in that space were bones. Not fragments, not ashes, but intact human bones. I stumbled backward, dropping the sledgehammer. This wasn't possible. These weren't cremated, remains mixed into plaster. These were complete skeletons, at least 3 of them, concealed within the wall cavity. My phone was in my hand before I consciously decided to call the police. Within an hour, my bedroom was filled with officers, crime scene technicians, and eventually a forensic anthropologist from the State Bureau of Investigation. These remains are decades old, the anthropologist confirmed after a preliminary examination. But they weren't placed here during construction. This wall has been opened and resealed at least once, possibly multiple times. I told them everything about the whispers, my research into Gerald Harmon and Ridgeview Crematorium, the cremated remains and the plaster. I left out the part about the voices identifying themselves. I didn't need the police thinking I was completely unhinged. The investigation that followed revealed the horrifying truth. Gerald Harmon hadn't just used unclaimed cremated remains in his building materials. He had been a serial killer, active for at least a decade before building the house. The remains in my wall were identified as 3 women who had disappeared between 1938 and 1940. All had been clients at Ridgeview, arranging funerals for loved ones. Harmon had targeted grieving women, killed them, and initially concealed their bodies somewhere else. When he built the house, he created hidden spaces within the walls where he transferred the remains. The cremated remains mixed in the plaster belonged to his legitimate crematorium clients, a twisted way of hiding his victims among those he was paid to care for in death. As the investigation expanded, more remains were found in other walls throughout the house. 7 bodies in total, all women, all connected to Ridgeview Crematorium. I couldn't stay in the house, of course. It became an active crime scene, then a macabre historical landmark of sorts. I moved into an apartment across town and tried to put the experience behind me. But sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I still hear whispers, not from the walls this time, but from somewhere inside my own head. Elizabeth, Thomas, Samuel, Mary, they found a way to leave with me. They're quieter now, more peaceful. They got their justice. Gerald Harmon's reputation was posthumously destroyed. The remains found in my walls were properly buried, in marked graves. The cremated remains and the plaster couldn't be separated or identified, so the house itself was eventually designated as a burial site. I drive by occasionally, looking at the place that was briefly my home. It stands empty now, a memorial to victims of a long-dead killer. No one will ever live there again. But sometimes, when I pass by at night, I see lights moving inside, though the electricity has long been disconnected. And if I roll down my window and listen carefully, I can hear them, the whispers within the walls, telling their stories to anyone who will listen. I listen. It's the least I can do. Someone needs to remember them. Someone needs to hear the whispers. Story 5. I never thought a children's song could destroy my life. That sounds melodramatic. I know, but when you've seen what I've seen, when you've heard what I've heard, you might understand why I'm recording this warning. It began 3 months ago, when my daughter Emma came home from kindergarten humming something unfamiliar. At first, I barely noticed it, just another tune she'd picked up at school. Emma was always singing something, whether it was the latest Disney anthem or the alphabet song. But this melody was different, slightly discordant, with an odd rhythm that seemed to stumble rather than flow. "What's that you're singing, sweetie?" I asked as I prepared dinner, chopping vegetables while she colored at the kitchen table. Emma didn't look up from her drawing. It's a song my new friend taught me. Oh, who's your new friend? I asked, smiling at how quickly children form attachments. Emma had always been sociable, making friends wherever she went. The girl in the corner, she replied, matter-of-factly, her crayon moving in deliberate strokes across the paper. I paused my chopping. Which corner, honey? Do you mean Lily or Madison? I knew most of the children in her class from birthday parties and playdates. Emma shook her head, still focused on her drawing. No, the girl who stands in the corner of the classroom, the one the teachers don't see. A slight chill ran through me, but I dismissed it. Children have imaginary friends all the time. I certainly did at her age. That's nice. What's the song about? Emma finally looked up, her eyes bright. Can I sing it for you? Of course. She cleared her throat dramatically, a gesture she'd learned from her theater-loving aunt, and began to sing, in her sweet childish voice, "Shadow friends come out to play. When the sun has gone away, midnight games will have such fun, until the sleeping has begun. Close your eyes, but do not peek. The shadow friends have souls to keep. One by one, they'll take you deep into the land of endless sleep." The melody was strange, almost medieval sounding, with unexpected minor notes. It made my skin prickle. That's interesting, Emma. Where did you say you learned it? From my friend. She says it's very old and very special. Emma returned to her coloring, now humming the tune again. Does your friend have a name? I tried to keep my voice casual. She says names have power, so she can't tell me yet, but she will when it's time. I forced a smile and turned back to the vegetables, telling myself it was just childhood imagination. But something about the song lingered in my mind, an unsettling echo that wouldn't fade. That night, I mentioned it to my husband, David. Kids make up weird stuff all the time, he said, not looking up from his laptop. Remember when she insisted there was a family of miniature elephants living in the heating vent? I laughed, feeling slightly reassured. You're right, I'm overthinking it. But the next morning, I found Emma standing in the corner of her bedroom, whispering to the empty space. Who are you talking to, sweetie? She turned, surprised, as if she'd been caught doing something forbidden. My friend. She likes this corner because it's dark even during the day. I glanced at the corner. It was indeed shadowy, tucked away from the window. What are you two talking about? She's teaching me the rest of the song. There's more verses. Can I hear them? I asked, trying to sound enthusiastic rather than concerned. Emma shook her head. Not yet. She says adults shouldn't hear all of it until it's time. Time for what? For the shadow friends to come out. She said it so matter-of-factly that goosebumps rose on my arms. I made a mental note to speak with her teacher, Ms. Winters, at drop-off. When I arrived at Little Sprouts Kindergarten, I waited until the children were settled with their morning activities. Hens Winters, has Emma mentioned anything about a new friend, or a song she's been learning? The young teacher's brow furrowed. Not specifically, but several of the children have been singing something during recess. I assumed it was from a TV show. Could you show me where Emma usually plays during indoor time? Ms. Winters led me to a bright classroom with colorful educational posters and children's artwork adorning the walls. Emma usually plays at the art station, or in the reading nook. She's very creative. I scanned the room, my eyes landing on a corner near the back, partially obscured by a bookshelf. Unlike the rest of the cheerful space, this corner seemed darker, as if the light didn't quite reach it. What about that corner? I asked, pointing. Miss Winters followed my gaze. Oh, we don't really use that space. There's a draft, probably poor insulation. The building is quite old. Has anyone ever mentioned seeing something there? The teacher gave me a curious look. No, nothing like that. Is everything okay, Mrs. Bennett? I forced a smile. Yes, of course. Just curious about Emma's new friend. You know how kids are with their imaginary playmates. Ms. Winters nodded, though she still looked slightly concerned. I'll keep an eye on her today. See if I notice anything unusual. I thanked her and left, feeling slightly foolish. Of course there was nothing in the corner. It was just a shadow, a draft, and a child's active imagination. That afternoon when I picked Emma up, Miss Winters pulled me aside. "Mrs. Bennet, I wanted to let you know that I observed something interesting today. That song you mentioned, it seems to be spreading among the children. By lunchtime, at least 8 kids were singing it." My stomach tightened. "Did you happen to hear the lyrics?" She nodded, something about shadow friends and sleeping. "It's a bit macabre for kindergartners, isn't it? Do you know where it originated?" I shook my head. "Emma says a friend taught it to her, but I haven't been able to figure out who." Well, children pick things up from all sorts of places: older siblings, television, overheard conversations. I wouldn't worry too much. But I did worry, especially when Emma began drawing pictures of her friend, a tall, thin figure with long dark hair, and no facial features except for a wide black smile. The figure always stood in a corner, surrounded by smaller figures that Emma explained were the other children who can see her. Over the next week, the song spread through the kindergarten like wildfire. Parents began mentioning it at pickup, some amused, others slightly concerned about the morbid lyrics. No one seemed to know where it had come from, but everyone's child was singing it. Then the nightmares began. First it was Emma waking up screaming about shadow people standing around her bed. Then reports from other parents, their children experiencing similar night terrors, all featuring shadowy figures and whispered songs. I started researching local folklore, wondering if this nursery rhyme had historical roots. Our town, Millfield, had been established in the 1700s and had its share of dark history. I spent hours in the local library's historical archives, searching for any mention of similar songs or stories. On my third visit, the elderly librarian, Mrs. Grayson, noticed my research focus. "Looking into local legends?" she asked, peering over her spectacles. "Sort of," I replied. "I'm trying to track down information about an old children's song. Something about shadow friends and endless sleep." Mrs. Grayson's face paled. "Where did you hear that?" The intensity of her reaction startled me. "My daughter brought it home from kindergarten. It seems to be making the rounds among the children." She glanced around, then lowered her voice. "Come with me." She led me to a small room at the back of the library, unlocking it with a key from the large ring at her waist. Inside were glass cases containing what appeared to be very old books and documents. "These are our most sensitive historical materials," she explained, approaching one of the cases. "Not many people ask to see them." She carefully extracted a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. "This is the diary of Reverend Thomas Blackwood, who served as minister here from 1843 to 1851. There's an entry you should read." She opened the journal to a marked page and handed it to me. The handwriting was spidery but legible. "October 17, 1847. Another child has fallen ill with the sleeping sickness. That makes 7 in total. The doctors are baffled, as the children simply will not wake, though their hearts beat and their lungs draw breath, before succumbing to this strange malady. Each child was reported singing the same haunting tune, the one that Widow Marsh taught them. The townspeople whisper of witchcraft, and I fear they may be right. The widow has long been suspected of communing with dark forces, ever since her own child died of fever last winter. She claims she merely taught the children an old lullaby, but I have heard the lyrics myself, and they speak of shadows and endless sleep. God preserve us all." My hands trembled as I turned the page. October 21, 1847. The mob took matters into their own hands last night. They dragged the widow from her home at the edge of town and brought her to the old oak by the schoolhouse. Though I pleaded for restraint and proper justice, their minds were set. As they placed the noose around her neck, the widow began to sing that accursed song, but with new verses I had not heard before. She fixed her eyes upon the children who had been brought to witness her punishment, and spoke these chilling words: "I go now to join my child in the shadow realm, but I shall return through the voices of your children, and they shall join my daughter in endless sleep." Then she stepped willingly from the cart. May God have mercy on her soul, though I fear she has already pledged it elsewhere. I looked up at Mrs. Grayson, my mouth dry. This can't be related. It's just a coincidence. She shook her head grimly. There's more. Every 50 years or so, the song resurfaces among the children of Millfield. And each time, children have fallen ill, some into comas, others simply gone. Gone. What do you mean? Gone. Disappeared. Without a trace. She took the journal back, handling it carefully. The last outbreak was in the 1970s. 3 children vanished from their beds. One was found wandering in the woods 3 days later, with no memory of what had happened. The other 2 were never found. And you think this is happening again? That's impossible. Even as I said it, I felt a cold certainty settling in my stomach. What's the name of your daughter's kindergarten? Mrs. Grayson asked. Little Sprouts. It's on Maple Street. Her expression grew even more troubled. That building was originally the town's first schoolhouse. The same one where the widow Marsh was hanged. I left the library in a daze, my mind racing. It couldn't be true. These were just stories, local legends exaggerated over time. And yet Emma's mysterious friend, the song spreading among the children, the nightmares. It all fit the pattern Mrs. Grayson had described. When I got home, I found Emma in her room, drawing again. This time, her picture showed the faceless woman leading a line of small figures toward a dark space. What's this drawing about, Emma? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. It's my friend showing us where we'll go to play the midnight game, she replied cheerfully. And where is that? The shadow place. She says it's time for us to learn the final verse. I sat down beside her, heart pounding. Emma, this friend of yours, have you ever seen her outside of school? Emma nodded. She follows me home sometimes. She's here now. My blood ran cold. Where? Emma pointed to the corner of her bedroom, the same corner where I'd found her whispering days earlier. There's no one there, sweetie, I said gently. You can't see her because you're a grown-up. Only kids can see her. She says grown-ups forgot how to look properly. Emma returned to her drawing, adding more small figures to the line. That night, I told David everything, the historical connection, Mrs. Grayson's warnings, the pattern of events. To my relief, he didn't dismiss my concerns. We should take Emma to a child psychologist, he suggested, and maybe keep her home from school for a few days, until we figure this out. I agreed, grateful for his support. We decided I would call the doctor in the morning, and that David would stay home with Emma while I went to speak with the school principal. We checked on Emma before going to bed ourselves. She was sleeping peacefully, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. I adjusted her blanket and kissed her forehead, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled over me. In the middle of the night, I woke suddenly, unsure what had disturbed my sleep. The house was silent, too silent. The familiar hum of the refrigerator, the occasional car passing outside, even David's gentle snoring beside me. All were absent, as if the world had been muted. Then I heard it, a soft, childish voice singing. Emma. I slipped out of bed and moved toward her room. The singing grew louder as I approached, but it wasn't just Emma's voice. It sounded like multiple children, all singing in eerie unison. I pushed open her door and froze at the threshold. Emma sat cross-legged in the middle of her bed, eyes open but unfocused, singing that terrible song. But she wasn't alone. Around her bed stood shadowy figures of children, their features indistinct except for their mouths, which moved in perfect synchronization with the lyrics. And in the corner stood a taller figure, a woman in old-fashioned clothes, her face hidden by long, dark hair. As I watched in horror, the woman slowly raised her head, and though I couldn't see her eyes, I felt her gaze lock with mine. A wide black smile split her face exactly as Emma had drawn it. I screamed David's name, and rushed to Emma, grabbing her by the shoulders. Emma, wake up. The moment I touched her, the singing stopped. The shadows vanished. Emma blinked up at me confused. Mommy, what's wrong? David appeared in the doorway, disoriented from being woken so abruptly. "What's happening?" I held Emma tightly, my heart racing. She was singing in her sleep, and there were shadows. Emma pulled back to look at me. "Did you see my friend? Did you see the widow?" David and I exchanged alarmed glances. We'd never mentioned that name to Emma. "How do you know about the widow?" I asked carefully. "She told me her name tonight. She said it's almost time for the final verse, and then we can all go play with her daughter in the shadow place." The next morning, I called every parent I had contact information for, warning them about the song and its history. Some dismissed me as hysterical, but others shared their own concerns about their children's recent nightmares and odd behavior. I also called Little Sprouts and spoke with the principal, explaining what I'd learned. To my surprise, she didn't dismiss my concerns. "There have been incidents over the years," she admitted reluctantly. "We've always attributed them to normal childhood illnesses or family issues, but the pattern you're describing, it's disturbing. What can we do?" I asked desperately. "I'm not sure, but perhaps if we break the pattern somehow, I'll call an emergency meeting with the parents and staff." That afternoon, the kindergarten held the meeting. Nearly every parent attended, many looking worried or skeptical. The principal explained the situation, the historical context, the recurring pattern, the current spread of the song among the children. "This may sound far-fetched," she concluded, "but too many elements align with historical accounts to dismiss entirely. Our priority must be the children's safety." One father scoffed. "You're suggesting we believe in some 70-year-old ghost story? This is ridiculous. My son hasn't slept through the night in a week," countered another parent. "He keeps talking about shadow friends coming to take him away. I don't care if it sounds crazy, something is wrong." Mrs. Grayson, whom I'd invited to the meeting, stood up. "Whether you believe in the supernatural elements or not, the historical pattern is clear. Every 50 years, this song resurfaces and children are affected. The question is, what can we do to protect them?" Local historian who had joined us suggested, "In folklore, breaking a curse often requires understanding its origin and addressing the original injustice." "The widow was executed for teaching children a song?" someone asked incredulously. "No," Mrs. Grayson clarified. "She was blamed for the children's illness because of the song. But what if she was innocent? What if she was merely grieving her own child and sharing a lullaby? So what? We issue a posthumous apology to a ghost?" the skeptical father asked. Before anyone could respond, the lights in the kindergarten classroom flickered. A cold draft swept through the room, causing papers to flutter from the teacher's desk. And then, from the corner near the bookshelf, came the sound of children singing the now familiar melody of the shadow song. But there were no children in the room. Several parents gasped. One mother began to cry. The skeptical father stood frozen, his face pale. The singing grew louder, and then a new voice joined in, an adult woman's voice, singing words we hadn't heard before. Vengeance sought for child now lost. Innocent blood at terrible cost. Hear my plea across the years. Acknowledge truth through your fears. The voice faded, leaving the room in stunned silence. The historian was the first to speak. I think she's asking for acknowledgement, for the truth to be recognized." "What truth?" I asked. "That she was wrongfully accused, that she was just a grieving mother." Over the next few hours, we formulated a plan. It felt absurd planning a ceremony to appease a 19th century ghost, but after what we'd witnessed, no one was laughing anymore. We decided to hold a memorial service at the old oak tree, where the widow had been hanged, which still stood at the edge of the school property. We would acknowledge the injustice of her execution and formally clear her name. As we made these plans, parents began calling home to check on their children, who had been kept home from school that day as a precaution. To our horror, 3 families couldn't reach their caregivers. When police were sent to check, they found the caregivers asleep but unable to be woken, and the children missing. A search was immediately organized. The entire town mobilized, combing through neighborhoods, woods, and parks. As darkness fell, There was still no sign of the 3 children. I kept Emma close to me, refusing to let her out of my sight. She seemed oblivious to the tension, humming that cursed song and occasionally stopping to whisper to empty corners. "Emma," I asked as I prepared her for bed that night, police officers stationed outside our house, "has your friend told you where the missing children are?" She nodded solemnly. "They're having their first midnight game with the widow's daughter. She's been so lonely waiting all this time. Will they come back?" Emma tilted her head, as if listening to someone I couldn't hear. "My friend says that depends on you grown-ups. If you do the right thing, they might." The memorial service was scheduled for noon the next day. The town council had hastily issued a formal declaration exonerating Elizabeth Marsh, the widow, of any wrongdoing in the 1847 sleeping sickness. Local clergy from various denominations agreed to participate in the ceremony. As we gathered under the ancient oak tree, I held Emma's hand tightly. Nearly the entire town had turned out, a mix of concern, curiosity, and desperate hope, bringing them together. The ceremony began with the reading of the town council's declaration, followed by prayers from the clergy. The historian gave a brief account of Elizabeth Marsh's life, her marriage, the birth of her daughter, her work as a midwife and healer, and finally the tragic death of her child from fever in the winter of 8. In her grief, the historian concluded, Elizabeth turned to old songs and remedies to comfort herself and the children she cared for. When illness struck those children, fear and superstition led our ancestors to blame her, rather than seek true understanding. Today, we acknowledge this injustice and ask for forgiveness. As the final words were spoken, a strange hush fell over the gathering. The air grew still. Then, from the direction of the kindergarten building, we heard children's voice singing the shadow song. Everyone turned to look. Emerging from the school doors were the 3 missing children, walking hand in hand. They looked tired but unharmed, their eyes slightly unfocused as they continued to sing. Parents rushed forward, embracing their returned children with cries of relief and joy. The children stopped singing, blinking as if waking from a trance. "Where were you?" one mother sobbed, clutching her son. "In the shadow place," he replied simply. "With the lonely girl, she just wanted friends to play with." Another child added. The widow said we could come back, because the grown-ups finally listened. The third child, a little girl named Lily, looked directly at Emma. "Your friend says thank you. She can go be with her daughter now." That evening, as I tucked Emma into bed, I asked her if she could still see her friend in the corner. She shook her head. "She's gone to the shadow place for good. She and her daughter are together now." Emma yawned, snuggling into her pillow. "She left something for you, though." My skin prickled. "What did she leave?" "Look under my pillow." With trembling hands, I reached beneath Emma's pillow and pulled out a small weathered piece of paper. On it was a child's drawing, yellowed with age, of 2 figures holding hands, a woman and a small girl. On the back, in faded ink, was written, "Elizabeth and Grace Marsh, 1840. I stared at it in disbelief. Where did this come from? But Emma was already asleep, her breathing deep and peaceful for the first time in weeks. The children who had been taken recovered fully, with no memory of where they had been except for vague descriptions of playing games in the shadows. The adults who had fallen into unnatural sleep awoke with no lasting effects, and the song, that terrible, haunting song, faded from the children's memories within days. Life in Millfield gradually returned to normal. The incident became another chapter in the town's strange history, filed away in the library archives alongside Reverend Blackwood's journal. But sometimes, when I pass by the old oak tree or walk through the kindergarten building for a parent-teacher conference, I feel a slight chill, a reminder of how thin the veil can be between our world and whatever lies beyond. And on rare occasions, I catch Emma looking into shadowy corners with a small, secretive smile. I've never heard her sing that song again, but I keep the drawing of Elizabeth and Grace Marsh locked in my desk drawer, a reminder that some stories don't end when we think they do. and that even the most terrifying curse might, at its heart, be born from the most human of emotions, a mother's love for her child. Story 6. I never should have taken it. That's what I keep telling myself now as I sit here in the darkness of my living room, listening to the sounds of the ocean despite being over 300 miles from the nearest coastline. The soft lapping of waves against a shore that isn't there, the distant calls of seabirds that shouldn't exist this far inland, and underneath it all, the whispers in a language I don't understand but somehow recognize. All because of that damn stone. It started 3 weeks ago during what was supposed to be a relaxing family vacation. My wife Sarah, our 2 children Emma, 14, and Liam, 8, and I had saved for months to visit Mokuana, a small island in the Pacific known for its pristine beaches and rich indigenous culture. The travel brochure had promised an authentic experience away from the typical tourist traps, which was exactly what we wanted after a particularly stressful year. The island was everything we'd hoped for: lush vegetation, crystal clear waters, and locals who seemed genuinely pleased to share their home with respectful visitors. For the first 4 days we stayed close to our resort, swimming in the designated areas and taking guided tours of the nearby rainforest. But by the 5th day I was feeling adventurous. I found something interesting in the guidebook. I told Sarah over breakfast on our villa's patio. There's a beach on the northern side of the island called Kaialu Cove. It's supposed to be one of the most beautiful spots, but it's a bit off the beaten path. Sarah looked up from helping Liam with his pancakes. Is it safe? What about the kids? The book says it's perfectly safe, just less visited, because it's harder to reach. We'd have to hike about a mile from the nearest road. I showed her the page with its tantalizing photo of black volcanic sand and turquoise water. She hesitated. I don't know, Michael. Emma wanted to try that paddleboarding lesson today, and Liam was looking forward to the kids' club. In the end, we compromised. Sarah would take the kids to their activities, and I would explore the cove alone, promising to take plenty of pictures and be back in time for our dinner reservation. The hike to Kaialu Cove was more challenging than the guidebook had suggested. What was described as a moderate walk turned out to be a narrow trail that wound through dense vegetation and over jagged volcanic rock. By the time I emerged onto the beach, my t-shirt was soaked with sweat and I had a small cut on my calf from a particularly sharp branch. But the discomfort vanished. The moment I saw the cove, it was even more beautiful than the photograph had suggested: a perfect crescent of obsidian sand, embraced by towering cliffs draped in emerald foliage. The water shifted between deep blue and vibrant turquoise as clouds passed overhead, and I could see colorful fish darting in the shallows. Most striking of all was the solitude. There wasn't another soul in sight, which seemed impossible for such a breathtaking location. Even if it was somewhat difficult to reach, I set down my backpack, took a long drink of water, and walked toward the shoreline, feeling as though I'd discovered my own private paradise. As I neared the water, something caught my eye: a small arrangement of stones near the tide line. They were placed in what was clearly a deliberate pattern, a circle of white pebbles surrounding a larger black stone in the center. The black stone was unusual, about the size of my palm, with strange natural markings that resembled a face, 2 depressions like eyes, a ridge like a nose, and a curved line that suggested a mouth. I crouched down to examine it more closely. The stone felt unusually cool, despite sitting in the tropical sun, and its surface was smoother than I would have expected from a beach rock. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. It was heavier than it looked, with a perfect balance that made it satisfying to hold. That's a beautiful find. The voice startled me so badly, I nearly dropped the stone. I turned to see an elderly man standing a few feet away. He wore simple clothes, khaki shorts, and a faded blue shirt. But something about him suggested he was a local, rather than another tourist. I'm sorry, I said, feeling suddenly guilty, as though I'd been caught doing something wrong. I didn't hear you approach. The man smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. We learned to walk quietly here. The spirits appreciate the silence. I wasn't sure how to respond to that. This is an amazing beach. I'm surprised there aren't more people here. Kaialu is a special place, he said, looking past me toward the water. Our people come here for certain ceremonies. Tourists usually prefer the resort beaches. He nodded toward the stone in my hand. You found one of the Hokapu stones. Hokapu offerings. That one is particularly interesting. The face that forms naturally, we call that a hextolona, a sign or omen. He stepped closer, studying the stone but making no move to touch it. They say such stones contain mana spiritual energy. I looked down at the stone with renewed interest. So this was left as some kind of religious offering. The man's expression became more serious. In a way, when someone from our island dies at sea, their family sometimes creates a hokoku of stones to help guide their spirit home. The face stone, what you're holding, is the most important part. It gives the lost one a vessel, you might say. A chill ran down my spine despite the warm day. So this is part of a memorial for someone who drowned. He nodded slowly. Many years ago, yes, a fishing boat was caught in a sudden storm. 5 men were lost. He pointed to the circle of white stones, one for each family that mourns. I immediately felt uncomfortable, holding the stone and moved to put it back in its place. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. It's all right, the man said, raising a hand. You meant no disrespect. But yes, it would be best to return it. Our guidebooks all mention that visitors should take nothing from our sacred places, not even a grain of sand. I carefully placed the black stone back in the center of the white circle, feeling a strange reluctance as my fingers left its smooth surface. I should have read that section more carefully. The man smiled again, more genuinely this time. No harm done. Enjoy your time at Kaialu. But remember, this place has many layers of history. Some visible, some hidden. He turned and began walking away along the beach. Wait, I called after him. Are you a guide? Do you work for the resort? He paused and looked back at me. I am just someone who knows this island well. Aloha, traveler. I watched him disappear around a bend in the coastline, then turned back to look at the stone arrangement. Something about our conversation had left me uneasy, but I pushed the feeling aside. I was here to enjoy this beautiful place, not get spooked by local superstitions. I spent about an hour at the cove, swimming in the crystal clear water and taking photos to show Sarah and the kids. As I was preparing to leave, I passed by the stone arrangement again. The black face stone seemed to watch me as I gathered my things, its eye-like depressions somehow more pronounced than I remembered. I don't know exactly what compelled me to do it. Maybe it was the collector in me, the same impulse that had me bringing home seashells and interesting rocks since childhood. Maybe it was the strange energy I felt from the stone, or the story the old man had told me. Whatever the reason, I glanced around to make sure I was alone, then quickly picked up the black stone and slipped it into my backpack. As I did, I thought I heard a faint sound like a sigh or a whisper, but when I looked around, there was only the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. I zipped my backpack closed and started the hike back, trying to ignore the weight of the stone that seemed heavier than its actual mass. The rest of our vacation passed without incident. I never mentioned the stone or my encounter with the old man to Sarah or the kids. Somehow it felt like a secret I needed to keep. I tucked the stone into a side pocket of my suitcase, wrapped in a t-shirt, and brought it home as a personal souvenir of our trip. It wasn't until 3 days after we returned to our suburban home in Colorado that things began to change. The first incident was so minor. I barely noticed it. I was in the shower when I thought I heard someone call my name. I turned off the water and listened, but the house was silent. Sarah was at work, and the kids were at school. I dismissed it as my imagination and finished my shower. That night, I placed the black stone on my bedside table. Under the lamp's glow, the face-like features seemed even more pronounced, the eyes deeper, the mouth more curved, as if it were smiling at some private joke. I fell asleep looking at it, wondering about the fisherman whose spirit it was supposed to guide. I dreamed of the ocean that night. Not the tranquil waters of Kaialu Cove, but a violent, storm-tossed sea. In the dream, I was on a small wooden boat, fighting against massive waves that threatened to capsize me at any moment. The sky was black with clouds, rain lashing my face, and I could hear men shouting in that same language I didn't understand. I was trying to reach something or someone in the water, but every time I got close, another wave would push me back. I woke up gasping for breath, my sheets soaked with sweat. Sarah stirred beside me. "You okay?" She mumbled sleepily. "Yeah," I whispered. "Just a nightmare." I reached for the glass of water I always kept on my nightstand, but my hand knocked against something else instead. The stone had moved from where I'd placed it, now sitting directly beside my water glass. I told myself I must have bumped it in my sleep or misremembered where I'd put it. The next day, I found a small puddle of water in the middle of the kitchen floor. At first, I thought one of the kids had spilled something and not cleaned it up, but when I knelt to wipe it, I noticed it was slightly salty. Before I could think too much about it, Liam came running in, excited to show me a drawing he'd made at school, and I forgot about the puddle. That evening, as I was helping Emma with her homework, I noticed she kept looking over my shoulder, distracted by something. "What's up, Em?" I asked, turning to see what she was looking at. "Nothing," she said, focusing back on her math problems. "I just thought I saw someone standing in the hallway." I checked, of course, but found nothing. The incident might have ended there, if Liam hadn't mentioned at dinner that he'd been hearing ocean sounds in his room at night. "What do you mean, buddy?" Sarah asked, passing him the salad bowl. "Like at the beach," he said simply. "Waves and stuff. And sometimes people talking, but I can't understand the words." Sarah and I exchanged glances. "You're probably just dreaming about our vacation," she suggested. "You had such a good time at the beach, right?" Liam nodded, already distracted by the chocolate pudding waiting for dessert. But I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. I hadn't told anyone about hearing whispers in a language I didn't recognize. That night I took the stone from my bedside table and placed it in my home office, inside a drawer where I kept miscellaneous items. Out of sight, out of mind, I thought. I slept better that night. No dreams of drowning or stormy seas. But when I went to my office the next morning, the drawer was open, and the stone was sitting on top of my desk, its face-like markings oriented toward my chair, as if watching and waiting for me. "Sarah," I called out, my voice shakier than I intended. "Did you move something from my desk?" "No," she called back from the kitchen. "Why?" I didn't answer. Instead, I picked up the stone, which felt unusually cold and damp, and locked it in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. This time, I kept the key with me. The incidents escalated over the next few days. All the faucets in the house turned on simultaneously in the middle of the night, flooding the bathroom and hallway. The smell of salt water and seaweed permeated the house. Even after we opened all the windows, mirrors began to show brief reflections of people standing behind us, people who weren't there when we turned around. The worst was when Sarah discovered strange marks on Liam's back, while helping him, battered welts that looked disturbingly like suction marks from tentacles, or the fingers of a hand that had grabbed him underwater. When questioned, Liam said matter-of-factly that the sea people had visited him in his dreams. I knew then that I had to tell Sarah the truth. That night, after the kids were asleep, I confessed everything: the stone, the old man's warning, the strange occurrences I'd been experiencing. "You brought back a memorial stone for drowned fishermen," she said incredulously, after being specifically told not to take anything. "What were you thinking, Michael?" I know, I said, running my hands through my hair. "It was stupid. I felt drawn to it somehow." Sarah paced our bedroom, arms crossed tightly across her chest. "And you think this stone is causing all the weird things happening in our house? The water, the noises, those marks on Liam? Put like that, it sounded ridiculous." But I nodded. "I can't explain it. But yes, I do." She stopped pacing and looked at me. "Then get rid of it. Throw it away today." The next morning, I drove to a nearby lake and threw the stone as far as I could into the water. I watched it arc through the air and disappear with a small splash, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Problem solved, I thought. I was wrong. That night was worse than any before. We all woke to the sound of crashing waves and splintering wood, so real and loud that I was convinced our house was being torn apart. Liam screamed that his room was filling with water, though it was perfectly dry when we rushed in. Emma reported seeing a group of men standing at the foot of her bed, their clothes dripping wet, their faces obscured by shadows. And in the morning, the stone was back sitting in the center of our kitchen table, a small puddle of water surrounding it. That's when I knew I had to take more drastic measures. I spent the day researching, calling the Mokuena Cultural Center, and eventually speaking with an anthropologist who specialized in Pacific Island spiritual beliefs. What you've described sounds like a Kino Low situation, the anthropologist, Dr. Nakoa, told me over the phone. In Hawaiian and other Polynesian belief systems, spirits can manifest through physical forms, animals, plants, stones. If this stone was indeed part of a ritual to guide lost souls, removing it from its place may have disrupted something. How do I fix it? I asked desperately. Ideally, return it exactly where you found it, with proper respect and perhaps an offering of your own as an apology. I booked a flight back to Mokuena that same day, despite the expense and Sarah's concerns about me traveling alone. This has to stop, I told her, for all our sakes. The journey back to the island felt like moving through a dream. The entire time, I kept the stone in a small cloth bag that Dr. Nakoa had suggested I use, following his instructions to treat it with respect. Even so, strange things happened during my travel. My watch stopped at the same time repeatedly. Other passengers on the plane reported hearing ocean sounds through their headphones, regardless of what they were listening to. And at one point, I swear the emergency exit door began to leak seawater. When I finally arrived at Mokuena, I rented a car and drove straight to the trailhead for Kaialu Cove. It was late afternoon and I wanted to reach the beach before sunset. As I hiked the now familiar trail, I felt watched from every direction, the jungle around me alive with whispers and movement that ceased whenever I turned to look. I emerged onto the black sand beach just as the sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. But something was wrong. The beach looked different somehow. The crescent shape was the same. The cliffs still towered on either side, but it felt empty, hollow, as if it were a movie set rather than a real place. Most disturbing of all, I couldn't find the circle of white stones where I had originally discovered the black stone. I walked the entire length of the beach twice, searching every inch, but there was no sign of the memorial. As the light began to fade, panic set in. What if I couldn't return the stone? Would my family be haunted forever by whatever I had disturbed? I stood at the water's edge, the cloth bag containing the stone clutched in my hand, and called out in desperation, "I've brought it back. I'm sorry for taking it. Please, tell me where to return it." Only the gentle lapping of waves answered me. The sun sank lower, the sky darkening from orange to deep purple. I was about to try again when I noticed a figure walking along the beach toward me. As it drew closer, I recognized the elderly man I had met on my first visit. "You've returned," he said simply, stopping a few feet away from me. "Yes," I replied, holding up the cloth bag. "I brought back the stone. I never should have taken it." He nodded slowly. "No, you shouldn't have. The Hajj, Ultrazalona stones are not souvenirs. They are anchors for those who are lost. I understand that now," I said, "but I can't find where it belongs. The circle of white stones is gone." The old man looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "The circle is gone because it served its purpose. When you took the center stone, the spirits believed they were being called." A chill ran down my spine. "Called? What do you mean?" "The face stone is a vessel, as I told you, but it's also a door. By removing it from this place and taking it into your home, you invited them to follow, and they did." I swallowed hard. The fisherman who drowned. The old man's eyes seemed to darken. Not just them. There are older things in these waters. Things that were here long before humans came to these islands. Things that are always looking for a way in. My hand tightened around the bag. "How do I fix this? How do I close the door? You can't simply put it back now. The connection has been made." He held out his hand. Give me the stone. I will show you what must be done. I hesitated only briefly before handing over the bag. The old man opened it and carefully removed the black stone, which seemed to gleam in the fading light, its face-like features more pronounced than ever. "Follow me," he said, turning toward the water. He led me to a part of the beach where the volcanic rock formed a natural shelf extending into the sea. As we walked out onto it, waves crashed against the sides, sending up sprays of salty water. At the end of the shelf, the old man stopped and turned to face the open ocean. "The ritual is simple but must be precise," he said, his voice nearly lost in the sound of the waves. "You must offer something of yourself in exchange for taking what was not yours. Blood is traditional, but in your case, I think something more is required." "More?" I asked nervously. "What do you mean?" "A memory," he said. "Your happiest memory of the ocean. The spirits will take it as payment, and you will never remember it again." I thought about all my ocean memories, teaching Emma to swim in the calm waters of a Florida beach when she was 5, watching Liam build his first sandcastle, the night Sarah and I walked along a moonlit shore in Maui on our honeymoon. The thought of losing any of these precious memories was painful. "How will I know which memory they've taken?" I asked.
The old man smiled sadly.
"You won't. That's the point. It will be as if it never happened for you, though others may remember it." I thought of the terror in Liam's eyes when he thought his room was filling with water, of the marks on his back, of Emma seeing drowned men at the foot of her bed. I thought of Sarah's fear and confusion. "I'll do it," I said firmly. "Tell me what to do." The ritual was indeed simple. The old man had me hold the stone in both hands, while he chanted in his native language. He produced a small knife and pricked my finger, allowing 3 drops of blood to fall onto the stone's face. Then he instructed me to close my eyes and bring to mind all my memories of the ocean, focusing on the joy and happiness they brought me. As I did, I felt a strange sensation like fingers rifling through the pages of a book, stopping occasionally to linger on certain images. There was a pulling feeling as if something was being gently extracted from my mind. I don't know how long it lasted, but when the old man told me to open my eyes, the stone in my hands had changed. The face was less distinct, the features softened as if weathered by years of waves. "Now," the old man said, "throw it as far as you can into the deep water." I did as instructed, using all my strength to hurl the stone out beyond the breaking waves. It disappeared into the darkening sea with barely a splash. "Is that it?" I asked, feeling strangely empty. "Will my family be safe now?" The old man nodded. "The door is closed. The spirits have been appeased with your offering." He studied my face. "Do you feel different?" I searched my feelings and memories. "I'm not sure. Everything seems the same. You wouldn't notice the absence of something you no longer remember," he said. "But yes, your family will be safe now. The disturbances will stop." As we walked back along the stone shelf toward the beach, I asked the question that had been bothering me since our first meeting. "Who are you? You seem to know so much about these things." The old man paused, looking out at the horizon where the last sliver of sun was disappearing. "I am a caretaker of sorts. I watch over places like Kaialu, ensuring the boundaries remain intact." "Boundaries between what?" He turned to look at me, his eyes reflecting the dying light in a way that seemed almost inhuman. "Between the world of the living and everything else." We reached the beach in silence. As we parted ways at the trailhead, the old man gave me one final warning. "The memory they took is gone, but the lesson should remain. Some things are not meant to be taken, some doors not meant to be opened. Remember that, if nothing else." I promised I would, and began the hike back, feeling lighter with each step, true to the old man's word. The strange occurrences in our home ceased immediately upon my return. The water leaks stopped, the whispers fell silent, and both children began sleeping peacefully through the night again. When Sarah asked about my trip and what had happened at the beach, I told her everything except for the specific details of the ritual. Something told me those were meant to remain between me and the old man. So it's over? She asked, relief evident in her voice. Whatever it was is gone. Yes, I assured her. It's over, and it was mostly, except for one thing. About a week after my return, we were looking through photos from our family vacation. There were dozens of pictures of the kids playing on the beach, of Sarah and me watching the sunset, of all the beautiful places we'd visited on Mokuaina. Hey, Sarah said suddenly, pointing to a photo of us on a boat. Where was this taken? I don't remember this trip. The photo showed the four of us on a small charter boat, all wearing snorkeling gear and smiling widely. Behind us was a stunning blue lagoon, surrounded by volcanic cliffs. That was the day we went to see the spinner dolphins, I said automatically. Remember? The guide took us to that hidden cove, and we swam with them for hours. Liam was scared at first, but then couldn't get enough. Sarah looked at me strangely. Michael, we never did that. We talked about booking a dolphin tour, but you said it was too expensive. I stared at the photo, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. There we were, clear as day, on a boat I had no memory of boarding, about to have an experience I couldn't recall. I looked at our faces, at the joy and excitement so evident in our expressions, at what must have been one of the highlights of our trip, and felt absolutely nothing. No recognition, no emotional connection, just emptiness. That's when I understood what the old man meant about the memory they would take. Not just any ocean memory, but perhaps the most precious one from that very island. A perfect day with my family that now existed only in photographs and in the memories of Sarah and the kids. I never told Sarah about the true cost of returning the stone. What would be the point? The memory is gone for me, irretrievable. Sometimes when the kids talk about the dolphins and how magical it was to swim with them, I smile and nod as if I remember, piecing together the experience through their stories and the photographs. And sometimes late at night when the house is quiet, I still hear the faint sound of waves lapping against a distant shore. Not threatening now, just reminding, a gentle warning, that some boundaries should never be crossed, some items never taken, a whisper from across that boundary, letting me know that while the door may be closed, it has not been forgotten. I never should have taken it. That's what I keep telling myself now, as I sit here in the darkness, listening to the echoes of a memory I'll never recover.